Hi, my name is Wharton, and I am here to present my research on morphological awareness intervention and its effects on the spelling outcomes of dyslexic learners. I'm currently teaching the Take Flight program in my school district, and I wanted to focus on Book 6 of Take Flight and how it can affect and influence the spelling efforts of my students. So as we get started, we're going to go over some terminology. Just so we have a little bit of background knowledge before we begin. Morphology, phonology, and orthography are some elements of our language that play an important role in literacy development. There are other elements as well, including syntax, semantics, pragmatics, but we're going to focus on these, and mainly morphology, but the others play a small role as well in what we're going to discuss today. Morphology is the study of word structure and meaning. It's the smallest units of meaning in our language. We call those morphemes. Some examples here, the word reheating, it has 3 morphemes. You have your prefix re, which means again. You have a base word heat, and then your suffix ing, which of course means it's happening right now in the present tense. Elephant is another example, another word that looks similar in the amount of letters, but of course it's only 1 morpheme. And you can't take anything off of that base word there. Phonology is the study of the sound system of our language. It's the smallest units of sounds. We call those phonemes. In the word shade, there's 5 letters, but there's only 3 phonemes. There's only 3 sounds in that word. Orthography is the conventional spelling system of our language. It involves mapping those sounds to their corresponding symbols, which we call graphemes, also known as letters. So we will talk a little bit about morphemes, phonemes, and graphemes. Morphemes are those smallest units of meaning in our language. Phonemes, of course, are the individual sounds, and graphemes represent those sounds in the form of a letter. It's interesting to note here, written English is morphophonemic, meaning it represents both morphemes and phonemes. It's more regular at the level of morpheme than at phoneme, because there are more phonemes. It means there's 44 sounds in our language, but there's only 26 letters. And so that is where it gets a little interesting for our students. Current morphology research, we want to do a little background on this quickly too. Phonology is phonics-based instruction, has been the most widely used instructional approach in teaching foundational reading skills, and it should be. It's very important, and our students, that's how they learn. They learn to map those sounds to the letters and letters to sounds, and this is the most researched instructional approach out there. The phonics approach is to teach that letter-sound correspondence, but research shows that this approach may lead to children to construe that spelling is primarily the representation of speech sounds, and that's not true. And as they get older, they need to know that it's not. We can't just always spell phonetically. Morphological awareness has been thought to be a higher order skill that isn't important to teach in early literacy years. Recent MA interventions, morphological awareness, we'll call that MA. Studies of those interventions show that young students rely on their morphological awareness for reading and writing, and they do respond to MA interventions, which previously it hadn't been thought that was something that should be introduced at a young age. So research has also shown that students with dyslexia develop morphological skills independent of phonological skills, and they use morphological awareness as a compensatory strategy for reading. Teaching morphological concepts to students with developmental dyslexia has also been shown to improve their reading, their decoding, their spelling and vocabulary, and they may use morphemic knowledge as a compensatory reading strategy. Research has shown that as well. So, all of this to say, it brought me to where I am now in the program and teaching Take Flight. So let me go over Take Flight really quickly. It's a comprehensive reading intervention. It's structured, phonologically based, and it's designed to improve literacy achievement for students with dyslexia. It's a language-based intervention. It addresses the 5 components of effective reading instruction using a very direct and systematic approach. It incorporates the phonological, the orthographic, and the morphological components, and it explicitly teaches during year 2 the morphological pieces, including Latin roots and affixes and Greek combining forms. And Book 6 is completely devoted to those Latin roots and affixes. The Latin and Greek morphemes that are taught in year 2 are not included in the spelling component of our daily lessons, and that was interesting to me. I thought the students should be learning how to spell these morphemes. But instead, specific spelling rules are directly taught during year 1 of the program, and then those rules are retaught and reinforced during year 2. Take flight students are likely to show gains in their spelling approximations that include these specific Latin and Greek morphemes, but it hasn't been assessed, and we don't teach our students to spell with these morphemes. The Take Flight curriculum, I'll just also mention this, it was designed for students as young as 7 years old, and prior research presented here and in my paper provides evidence that the morphological component of this program can be effective in improving the spelling approximations of young students in the program when they spell with morphemes versus spelling just phonetically. So my research questions were, does the morphology component of year 2 of the Take Flight curriculum affect the spelling approximations of dyslexic students? And does the dyslexic student's age play a role in whether morphological awareness instruction improves their spelling abilities? Also research shows that directly teaching morphological awareness skills to dyslexic students can improve their spelling approximations. But I wanted to know, does the age of the student influence the effects of that morphological intervention? So the participants in my study, I had 22 students that participated. They ranged in age from 8 to 13 years old, which is 3rd grade up to 7th grade. They were all year 2 students that are in the Take Flight program, and they're all receiving instruction from Book 6. The students represent 5 different campuses, including a middle school campus. And these students were chosen by the therapist who agreed to take part in the study after they reviewed all the qualifications and requirements of the study. Of those 22 students, 10 have dyslexia and ADHD comorbidity, 3 receive special education services, and 5 have been retained. And they all attend dyslexia therapy 5 days a week for 45 minutes per session. The materials were the Take Flight program, the curriculum. Specifically, Book 6 of the curriculum is where we are at, and that was dedicated to those Latin roots and affixes. Only lessons 108 through 117 were included in these 5 weeks of instruction. And since the lessons are all morpheme-based in Book 6, I created a daily review that would review those Latin roots and affixes taught. And then those were developed to review the Latin-based morphemes that were already taught and implemented by all the therapists that were participating in this study. Because the number of year 2 students at one campus is relatively small, I extended this to some other therapists to get a larger sample size and to increase that age range among the year 2 students. Here were some review or examples of the daily reviews and the questions that were taught or reviewed with the students. I had them do these various things here, made it multisensory. They did have to tell me the name of the root, if I gave them what it meant, the meaning of the root, and then they also worked on identifying and spelling the root while I wrote it on the board, and we discussed the spelling of it. And again, I would give them words, and they would have to tell me what the root was within that word. So some things like this, and all the therapists did this as well. The procedures. I used a pre-test and post-test that I developed, and it was used to determine if these students did actually improve their spelling approximations using the morphemes that were taught. They were given the pre-test during Book 6. Previously taught Latin roots from the beginning of Book 6 were not included. And then they received 5 weeks of intervention, or 25 days, from Book 6, which included the daily reviews at the end of each lesson. The Take Flight instruction was presented in 2 alternating daily lesson plans. New concepts taught on A days, and so for 5 weeks there were 2 new lessons per week, so for a total of 10 lessons. And then the post-test was given at the end of 25 days. The data collection, the students were given the morphological spelling test consisting of 10 words. Here's a pre-test that I used and the post-test. You can see here and which lesson it corresponded with. The students were taught 10 lessons with 2 of those new morphemes introduced per week on those A days. And then after 25 days of instruction, the therapist administered a post-test of 10 different words that were also based on those same morphemes. let's see. Oh, data analysis. So here's how I did the scoring. For every correctly spelled morpheme on the pretest, there was a score of 1 given. And every word on the spelling test consisted of 2 morphemes for a total of 20 points. If they got 1 morpheme correct, they got 1 point. If they got both morphemes correct, they got 2 points. And then, of course, if they didn't get either one of them right, the prefix or the root, then they got a score of 0. And the post-test was scored in the same manner. Here were some sample responses that I got from students on the pretest and post-test. You can see their grade, and you can see what the target word was that they were trying to spell. And these are interesting to look at. There wasn't extensive increases in scores, which you'll see in just a minute, but it was interesting to note that even some of those misspelled morphemes on the post-test were closer to the target morpheme when compared to the pretest target word. You can see, for example, in this 5th grade pretest, they spelled impoles, P-O-L-E-S, instead of that morpheme P-U-L-S, pulse. And so that kind of suggests that he relied on a spelling that he already knew, since he didn't know that morpheme pulse. And then you can tell on the post-test, even though he spelled it wrong, he still got very close, and actually did spell that morpheme correctly. He just left off the E on that target word. You can see the results here of the pretest and the post-test, and the gain in the right column of their gain in scores. It's all very similar across all grade levels. The lowest gain there was in 6th grade, and the greatest gain was 7th grade, with 5th, 4th, and 3rd looking very similar. Here's their post-test scores and the standard deviation. So let's looking at the results. Does the morphology component of Year 2 of the Take Flight curriculum affect the spelling approximations of students with dyslexia? And the scores indicate that on average, the students across all grade levels demonstrated improved spelling efforts. They may have been moderate, but there was evidence that they did improve, all very similarly. While there was evidence that some students still spelled phonetically by sound by sound, there was also evidence that they spelled morphemically, since many of those morphemes assessed aren't spelled the way that they sound. Also, second question, does the dyslexic student's age play a role in whether MA instruction improves their spelling abilities? And while you could tell there were moderate increases observed across all age groups, this does suggest that their age doesn't have an influence and effect on whether they respond to the interventions. They all pretty much responded very similarly, regardless of age or grade. So, to discuss what was observed here, it's evident that students improved their awareness of some of those specifically taught morphemes, since those words couldn't be spelled phonetically, so they had to learn the way that morpheme looked. Some students were observed sounding out words during the pretest and post-test, so it can be assumed that they still rely on that phonological and phonemic awareness to help them spell. And it's interesting to note that while students had repeated exposure to these roots over the course of 5 weeks, many of them still struggled with the spelling of the target morphemes, even the older students. So this suggests that teaching morphemes is not enough to improve spelling outcomes. Other aspects of language need to be addressed. Our limitations, we had a very small sample size. It could limit the extent to which findings can be generalized. Many students had comorbidities, and those could affect as well their spelling outcomes. And multiple therapists were administering this treatment, so I didn't have a way to determine if it was implemented with the same fidelity and quality across all settings. There were other unmeasured variables that can affect a student's spelling efforts as well, and only one aspect was measured here. Students with or without dyslexia rely on orthographic processing to help them spell, which is that ability to see words and visualize them in your head. And part of MA involves understanding written morphemes, what they look like orthographically, and how they attach to base words and roots, and that wasn't addressed or assessed at all. So a task involving only written morphemes is not a true representation of a student's MA, because it represents many aspects of spoken language, not just written language. But overall, I was very happy with the outcomes here. I do know that MA can improve spelling efforts of students having that intervention. The evidence provided in this study demonstrates the potential value of explicitly teaching those morphemes to young children. Research shows that students with literacy difficulties rely not on phonological knowledge, but also morphological knowledge as well. And it's imperative that we address morphological knowledge and have interventions for students at a very young age to help improve their reading and spelling efforts. Thank you.